Hello, this is Amin, and you are watching session 45 of ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. In this session, we start working with Entity Framework Core. Entity Framework Core is a lightweight, extensible, open source, and cross-platform version of the popular Entity Framework data access technology. Entity Framework Core can serve as an Object Relational Mapper, ORM, which enable .NET developer to work with a database using .NET objects. As you can see here, Entity Framework Core is a platform between web application and database, and we can work with database inside our web application with Entity Framework Core. Entity Framework Core has two approaches, code first and database first. In code first approach, we have domain and context classes, and Entity Framework creates a database and tables with the domain and context classes. As I mentioned, in code first approach, first I should create my domain classes and context classes, and then based on the created domain classes and context classes, Entity Framework Core create a database and the tables based on the created models. And the second approach is database first approach, and we use this approach when we already have a database with different tables and sometimes with the value, and Entity Framework Core will create a domain classes and context class based on the database and the tables and the structure that it has. Also, we have providers. Providers is a layer between the Entity Framework and database. We can connect our web application to different database engine, to relational and non-relational database, same as SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, and etc. Here you can see list of the providers that we can use to connect our web application to different database engine. For example, if we want to work with Microsoft SQL Server, we can install Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server NuGet Packages, or for SQLite, we can use another NuGet packages, or for MySQL, we can install this provider to connect our database and Entity Framework with the database that we want. And also, if we want to work with relational databases, we have to install first Microsoft Entity Framework Core NuGet package, and then Microsoft Entity Framework Core relational NuGet packages, and then based on the database that we want to work, we should install a proper provider to connect our web application to the databases. Then we should create a context class. Let's flip to Visual Studio and first install the NuGet packages that we need to work with Entity Framework. And then we create our DB context class. In the upcoming session, we connect our web application to the database that we want. For example, we try to connect our web application to MySQL database engine, or even to SQL Server database engine. Let's flip to Visual Studio and first make our web application ready to use Entity Framework. This is the web application that we have been working so far throughout this tutorial. And if you look at the dependencies framework, you can see I have Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.app, which contains several packages. And inside the packages, I have just Microsoft Visual Studio web code generation. And I need to install the packages that I introduced inside the slides to connect my web application to the database that I want. For this purpose, I right click in Packages and manage NuGet Packages. And here I have three tabs: Browse, Installed, and Update. And inside the Installed, I have the already installed packages, which I have Microsoft.Visual Studio, .web, .code generation, .design. And here I can search for the packages that I want. The first package that I need is Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and as you can see, I have Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, and also I need Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.relational and the provider that I want to use for connect my web application to the database that I want. But if, for example, I use Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server, this package, it automatically install the Microsoft Entity Framework Core Relational for myself because it has a dependency to Microsoft Entity Framework Core Relational, and also it automatically installed Microsoft.NET Entity Framework Core. But as I want to show you all the steps of installation of the required packages, I'm going to install first Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and then I install Microsoft Entity Framework Core.relational, and then I set up SQL Server, and also I will set up the provider which I can connect my web application to MySQL as well. And also I installed another package for using Package Manager console to migrate my database. In this video series, I'm going to explain code first approach. As I mentioned, we have two approaches: code first approach and database first approach. And as we start this project from scratch, I'm going to implement the database and create the database with the models and with the classes that I created in this web application. Let me first install Microsoft Entity Framework Core. At the moment of recording this video, and this version needs .NET 6, and as I selected .NET 5 when I created this project, that's why I should install the version which is compatible with web application that I have. And as you can see, version 5.0.13 is the compatible version with the .NET 5. Let me install this package. And here I should accept the license. And as long as the package will be installed, you can see the installed inside the installed package Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And then I return to browse. And again, this time I search for Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.relational. As I needed this package for work with the relational database, same as Microsoft SQL and MySQL, I installed this one, and I should select the version which is compatible with the .NET framework of this web application. I install it, and I accept the license. And the next one is the SQL Server NuGet package, which is a provider. And I select the version which is compatible with the .NET Framework 5. And as you can see, again, I should accept the license. And now I have the required packages here. And as I mentioned, I will install another package, which is the tools which help me to work with the package manager console to migrate my database. That's why I installed another package, which is Microsoft.entityframework core.tools. And as you can see in the description, it enables us to work with the NuGet Package Manager console to use these commands, same as update database, add migration, drop database, and other commands that I describe in the upcoming session. And we work with this command in the upcoming sessions. That's why I should install this one. And again, I select the proper version that I want and I install it. And again, I accept the license. And now if you look at the installed one, you can see I have the packages that I want for working with the entity framework and working with database. And next, I should create a DB context class, and within the DB context class, through the constructor and option file of the constructor, I can connect this web application to the database throughout the startup class. And also inside the DB context, I can set the data set and the domain classes that I have. I go to model and create one class. I call it web app DB context. And here I have a web app DB context class. The class should be inherited from DB context class. And the namespace is not available. I can add the namespace, which is inside Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And now the web app DB context is implemented from DB context. The best way of configuring this web app DB context class is creating constructor, and I can create the constructor with the pressing Control period key and select the constructor. And you can see the constructor is created. And here I should modify this constructor to the way that I can connect this web application to the database that I want. I don't need this part of code, that's why I remove it. And I use the web app DB context as a DB context option, and I copy the name of web app DB context here, and I save it. In the next session, I will show you how you can use this DB context option file and how you can connect this DB context file to the database through the provider, and how you can set the DB context option inside the startup class. In this session, we introduced Entity Framework Core, and we talked about providers and the NuGet packages we need to work with the Entity Framework. And also we created a DB context class, and the DB context class is implemented from the DB context class, which is inside Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. And then we create a constructor, and this constructor has an option, and the DB context option is using this web app DB context. And in upcoming session, I will show you how you can use this DB context option. Thank you for watching this session, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media channels to receive the update of this tutorial series. Once more, thank you for being with us.